We have a semitendinosus tendon, 29 cm long. Muscle fibers have been removed. To prepare the graft using corrugated sutures, we need 3 non-absorbable sutures and femoral button, self-tightening or with a constant loop length. To prepare the graft for ACL reconstruction, we fold the tendon in half, fix it on the preparation table and suture both free ends with a baseball suture in the proximal and then in the distal direction. Then we pass the loop of the tendon graft into the loop of the threads of the femoral button. Fold the graft in half and pass one of the ends of the thread through the loop of the tendon graft. We straighten the graft bundles and fix it in a taut state on the preparation table with a force of 20 newtons. We start applying circular sutures, first at the proximal femoral end of the graft and then at the distal tibial end. According to research, 3 such circular sutures are sufficient. These sutures prevent the longitudinal movements of the graft bundles relative to each other. When applying circular sutures, we pass the thread twice in the transverse direction through the graft bundles. Several times, wrap the thread around the graft and tie the ends of the thread together. After that, we cut off the free end of the thread at a distance of about 7 mm from the knot and immerse the knot in the thickness of the graft. Cut off the end of the thread coming out of the graft. After applying circular sutures, we proceed to formation of corrugated sutures, first on the distal and then on the proximal ends of the graft. These sutures provide a tight press-fit fixation of the ends of the graft after its installation in the bone tunnels. To form a corrugated suture at the end of the graft, we stitch it across from back to front 3 times, then 3 times from front to back, as you can see on this video. At the end of the threads of the distal corrugating suture, we form by 1 knot for marking and differentiating these ends before tying them on the tibial cortical fixator. As option, you can use threads different colors. Then we proceed to formation of a corrugating suture at the proximal end of the graft, passing the thread in the thickness of the graft and along it. Stitch it across from back to front 3 times, then 3 times from front to back. At the ends of the threads of the proximal corrugated suture, we form by 2 knots for marking and differentiating these ends before tying them on the tibial cortical fixator. Pulling the ends of the distal corrugated sutures provides a thickening of the distal end of the graft in the bone tunnel and its additional press-feed fixation after the graft is inserted. Pulling the ends of the proximal corrugated sutures provides a thickening of the proximal femoral end of the graft in the bone tunnel and its additional press-feed fixation after the graft placement. Also, these threads act as a material reinforcing the graft. Let's shift the patella on the model to the outside. After that, we will see the anterior cruciate ligament. To demonstrate graft placement, we will remove the anterior cruciate ligament on this model. Put the femoral offset guide, along which the guide wire is inserted into the femur. Remove the femoral guide. Along the guide pin, we form a tunnel in the femur with a reamer with a diameter of 4.5 mm. We remove bone debris from the joint cavity and femoral canal using a shaver. We proceed to reaming the femoral tunnel along the guide wire to a depth of about 2 cm, using a reamer with a diameter corresponding to the diameter of the graft. Remove the reamer and pin from the femoral tunnel. Remove bone debris from the joint cavity and femoral canal using a shaver. Put the tibial guide along which the guide wire is passed into the tibia. Remove the tibial guide. Along the guide pin, we form a through tunnel in the tibia with a reamer with a diameter of 4.5 mm. Next, we proceed to the formation of a tibial tunnel along the guide wire using a reamer with a diameter corresponding to the diameter of the graft. The use of staged reaming with reamers of increasing diameter avoids breaking out of the cortical bone in the joint cavity and also corrects, if necessary, the position of the internal aperture of the tibial tunnel. Through the femoral tunnel, we draw a pin with an eyelet and a guide thread. We remove the pin, holding the loop of the guide thread. Bring this thread through the outer aperture of the tibial tunnel. We insert the loose threads of the femoral button into the loop of the guide thread and bring them to the outer surface of the femur. By traction on the free threads of the femoral button and counter-traction on the threads from the tibial end of the graft without marks, knots, we pulling out the femoral cortical fixator of the graft. At the top of the EndoCap on the side facing up, there is a mark indicating the location of the visa on the back of the fixator. The side of the EndoCap facing the tunnel has spikes that prevent rotational movement of the fixator and decrease pressure on the surrounding soft tissues. After installation, the visa of the fixator rests against the upper edge of the outer aperture of the tibial tunnel, providing tight compression and eliminating the displacement of the fixator in the upper-lower direction. EndoCap has straight edges on the sides that allow it to be immersed during installation using any clamp or tweezers. As option, it's possible to immerse the fixator with a mosquito clamp by inserting its jaws into the holes for the threads. We proceed to pulling the threads from the graft in pairs into the holes of the EndoCap, focusing on the previously located tag knots. First, we pass a couple of threads without knots. Then, 1 knot sutures that come from the distal corrugating suture. Then, sutures with 2 knots that go from the proximal corrugating suture and reinforce the graft. We immerse the fixator on the cortical bone of the outer aperture of the tibial tunnel. At the same time, make sure that the mark is facing up. Then, carrying out constant traction on the threads without knots, we tie their ends above the bridges between the holes of the fixator. Then, after strong alternating traction at the ends of the threads with 1 knot, we tie their ends above the bridges between the holes of the EndoCap. The preliminary traction by the sutures ensures the crimping of the graft inside the tibial tunnel. Then, after strong alternating traction at the ends of the threads with 2 knots, we tie their ends above the bridges between the holes of the fixator. Pre-traction for these threads provides crimping of the graft inside the femoral tunnel and also reinforces the graft. The ends of all threads coming out of the tibial fixator are cut at a distance of about 7 to 10 mm from the knots. EndoCap provides a very stable cortical fixation of the graft, and the corrugated sutures provide a tight fixation of the graft to the walls of the bone tunnels. Doctive Lab exclusive distributor of the EndoCap Tibial button.